Hello and welcome. You're watching Coronavirus Facts versus Myths. I'm Rishika Barua. India is in the midst of an unprecedented crisis of coronavirus, witnessing the highest daily spike of over 3 lakh cases for 2 straight days. There have been over 2,200 deaths that have been reported in the last 24 hours. This is also the highest ever, and these are just the official figures. The positivity rate in the country is soaring at 13% currently. Recoveries have dipped from what they were just 90% weeks ago. Recoveries are now under 85% as of today. There is a shortage of medical oxygen being reported. There's a shortage of beds being reported. There are COVID-19 patients lying on stretchers, in ambulances, in private vehicles outside most major hospitals in the national capital, and the situation is no different in other parts of the country. Medicines, there is a shortage that has made it worse. The ICMR is now reporting on statistics that there is a double mutation of COVID-19 and the UK strain that is prevalent in different parts of the country. This is no longer concentrated to few states only. To make sense of India's catastrophic second wave, we have with us Professor Fahim Yunus. He's the Chief of Infectious Diseases at the University of Maryland. Thanks so much for joining us on the broadcast. It is an unprecedented crisis that India is seeing at the moment. I want to begin by asking you, our daily COVID numbers have been over 3 lakhs for 2 straight days, the highest in the history of the pandemic. How are you looking at India's second wave?
Yeah, I think it's devastating considering what India's infrastructure is, the number of ICU beds, the number of ventilators, and the number of patients. We have gone through a devastating second wave here in the United States between January and February. So I can only imagine how difficult this must be for people on the ground.
Well, this increase in demand for medical oxygen, is this something that is specific, typical to these variant strains or double mutation that is being found in India? Did you see this in the United States too? Because many hospitals are continuously sending out SOS messages that they're running short on oxygen.
No, I think it's very likely linked to the UK strain, the B.1.1.7, that first ravaged through UK and much of Europe, then came to United States, and we saw a major increase. That's the most prevalent variant in the United States, and I'm sure it's one of the most prevalent variants in India. I'm aware of the other variant in India as well, but last I checked, less than 1% of genetic phenotyping or sequencing was done, and typically you will need at least 5% of genetic sequencing done in a representative sample. So how much of that strain is impacting is yet to be seen, but it's pretty obvious that 117 is at least 30 to 50% more transmissible, and just by simple arithmetics, if it continues to infect more people, in the end, more people will die, even if it's not more lethal, because the denominator increases, it just infects a lot more people. So I think that's what we are seeing in India right now.
Well, it's very interesting what you're saying, because India's genome sequencing is very low. We barely understand, what mutations are spreading. I want to ask you, would clinical management strategies of COVID-19 differ if our doctors knew more about the variant strains that they were dealing with in their positive patients?
Probably not. So far what we know is that the level of protection, the virus has upped its game, and we have to up our game. What I mean by that is, if a cloth mask was enough before, I keep telling people, try to get an N95 or a KN95 or at least a surgical mask like this one, and then you can keep reusing it. Keep it in a paper bag and keep reusing it. As far as treatments are concerned, there is no different treatment for variant strain. We still have pretty much dexamethasone, anticoagulation, and in some select cases remdesivir. There is nothing much more. And then oxygen support for a very long time.
What is it going to take to flatten the curve? There are many experts who say that you can't vaccinate your way out of a surge like this. Do you agree with that assessment?
I would disagree. I think vaccination is the only way to end this pandemic, but there is a way to do it. Number one thing is political will. People come together. You know, when a leader starts planting rose in his garden, people start planting rose in their garden without anyone telling them. So it all starts with leadership and political will. And after that, you have to all unify on a single message that it's important. This is our first priority. And here are the scientific ways. Follow science. And I think number three, scientists, physicians. India has produced world-class doctors. Those doctors should be leading the communication in all languages so people can understand exactly what is being asked of them. If you don't have good communication, you will not have good vaccination, because people are going to have questions. So we are jumping to the step, which is number 7 in list. I think number 1 step is political will, and then you communicate it repeatedly in a unified fashion. And then without vaccination, this virus will burn through the forest. We will pay a lot bigger price. And vaccination, whichever vaccine you have, because all these vaccines are safe, some may be a little bit more effective than others, but whatever you have available is the vaccine you should take.
You know, it's very interesting that you actually agree that you can vaccinate your way out of this surge. There are many people in India currently who are divided over the vaccine. Many who want to wait for a better vaccine with a higher efficacy, given the fact that India has liberalized its vaccine regimen. What would you like to say to them? Should they get the vaccines that are available in India right now, or would it be worth the wait?
It's a very difficult question, and these are the difficult things that this pandemic has thrown at us. And I think we should be brave enough to say we don't know where we don't know, because these things have not been tested and studied. There are too many variables here. So everybody's going to have to make a decision based on incomplete data. What I can tell to people out there, and this may help them, this may not help them. If I was working in India or Pakistan right now, if I was on the front line, if I had to go to work every day, I would myself take whichever vaccine was available to me, and I would not wait for something. A bird in hand is better than 2 in the bush. Who knows, that second vaccine may come 3 months from now, and by that time we may have enough knowledge to say, all right, you can also take this vaccine on top of it. But 3 months is a very long time to let a virus go unchecked.
So if I understand you correctly, what you're essentially saying is that you could potentially take an Indian vaccine right now and then take a booster shot of a foreign vaccine later, which doesn't necessarily have the same technology?
Sure, a booster shot or even a regular shot. So if regular Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson that we're using right now, if they become available 3 months from now, I think they're all effective against the variants. We know that. So you could take that vaccine. Again, I don't know, but there's just plausibility. You could potentially take that vaccine at that time. There may be enough research to support that. I also know that Pfizer is now working on a booster vaccine in which they are using some of the variants. So it may have even stronger efficacy against those variants. I won't bank on the availability of that vaccine worldwide, because we've seen the supply chain issue with right now when we have 7 or 8 vaccines available. If only one company comes out with a booster shot, I think the supply chain and the demand equation will not match, and it may not reach everywhere. So this is why I keep telling people, you don't know. You may have to wait for weeks and months for that supply. Things are changing. Nobody is in complete control here. Everybody's interdependent. So the best option is, if I was there, if my family is listening, I would tell them to take whatever vaccine is available right now.
All right. Take whatever vaccine is available right now. I think we're going to end this interview on that note. Thank you so much, Professor Yunus, for sparing your time and being with us on NDTV. The second wave of COVID-19 in India has seen states facing an acute shortage of medical oxygen. This is a story we continue to track very closely on NDTV, as many hospitals in Delhi and other states constantly reach out to us with SOS messages. Now, these hospitals are operating on edge due to the shortage of medical oxygen. SOS messages going out every few hours. Doctors are often heard advising at a time like this that mild or moderately ill patients should stay at home so that the hospital infrastructure can be rationed to serve those who are most needy and most critical. But how do you decide as a COVID positive patient or as someone who is taking care of a COVID positive patient, how do you decide when you need hospital admission and what are the indicators? We'll go across to our expert doctors who will help us understand some of this. Dr. G.C. Khilnani, Chairman of the PSRI Institute of Pulmonary Care, is joining us. He's a pulmonologist. We also have Dr. Yatin Mehta. He is the Chairman of Critical Care at the Medanta Hospital. Thank you, doctors, for being with us. Dr. Khilnani, to you first. What's the indicator? When does a person need oxygen? More importantly, when do they need to be taken to the hospital?
So when you want to decide these crucial things, two things matter. One is the parameters like age, diabetes, comorbid conditions, hypertension, CAD, cancer, rheumatic diseases. These are the patients who would need special attention. As far as the guideline goes, whenever the oxygen saturation goes down below 94%, that becomes an indication for giving oxygen and also getting prepared for getting admission to the hospital. Now, if I talk of Delhi today, the situation has changed. There is absolutely no beds. So there has to be some rationalization, and in last 1 week, we have gone to the extent of advising people to acquire oxygen at home because we are unable to admit them in the hospital. So the prioritization has to be done. The ways of giving oxygen is by cylinder or by giving oxygen concentrator. The optimum oxygenation that is to be maintained at between 92 and 96%. Through you, I want to tell the people that it's not more the merry. It's, people try to achieve 99% oxygen. They think their patient will become better with 99. In today's time, when the oxygen is an absolute shortage all over the country and that cylinders are difficult to get filled. So there has to be rationalization. Other thing I want to say is that sometimes even the oxygen is not there. The oxygen is going down and he is unable to get a bed in the hospital, and that moment there is a tremendous role of putting the patient on the prone position that
yes.
You lie down on your belly, and that physiologically automatically improves their oxygenation. So 2 hours you be on the belly, 2 hours on the side. The people who are not able to lie down on the belly, even if they turn on the side, the oxygenation improves. Now, these to be done at home are not conventional things. These are extraordinary situations, and I strongly believe the extraordinary situation requires extraordinary measures. We in the hospital are also trying to conserve oxygen and
right.
telling our young colleagues not to over-oxygenate people and then give oxygen, just maintain 92% of saturation. Other thing is, as far as the equipment is concerned, there is equipment called high-flow nasal cannula, which requires oxygen at the rate of 45 liters or 60 liters a minute. We are trying not to use that modality. So everything should be done within the safety limit.
Right.
Not to use over-oxygenate people. But having said that, life is very important. One has to be extremely cautious in monitoring oxygen levels. That should be kept in mind.
Right. Dr. Khilnani, because you are an expert pulmonologist, another very quick question. The new guidelines for COVID treatment have included an inhaled steroid. What more can you tell our viewers about it?
The inhaled steroids are good for, one, there are two things. One, 5 to 10% population is asthmatic. They do take inhaled steroids. So they have a lot of misconceptions that if they are taking inhaled steroids, they will be more prone to getting COVID infection.
Right.
So that is not true. If at all there is slight evidence they get protected because of taking inhaled steroids. As far as the COVID patients are concerned, when they get pneumonia, the inhaled steroids will help them and control the local inflammation, and there is a thought process that this might control their symptom of cough. Besides this, the inhaled steroids do not have any therapeutic value.
Okay.
The systemic steroids have value.
All right, but there is the new inhaled steroid that's been added according to the new guidelines that have been put out, and they say that it should be given if symptoms persist beyond 5 days of disease onset, symptoms such as fever and cough. But yeah. Yes, Dr. Yatin Mehta, I want to also ask you, as a part of these new guidelines that we're putting out on our screens at the moment, it's crucial to note that ivermectin has been prescribed in mild cases and FabiFlu has been removed. Now, there's a mad scramble for these drugs in the market. What's the advice you'd like to give our viewers?
No, I think, see, the evidence regarding remdesivir and FabiFlu, remdesivir had stronger evidence. But let me clarify for all your audience, remdesivir is not a wonder drug. It is not to be given to every patient. It is only for moderate to severe patients who are admitted to the hospital and who are getting worse and the inflammatory markers are high. Okay? So it is not to be given at home. Many people want to come to a hospital to get remdesivir and think they will get cured by it. That is how remdesivir, black marketing is happening and shortage is happening. FabiFlu, the evidence, there are some papers, including Indian studies, it's approved by DCGI, for mild to moderate cases. So for mild cases, I still use it for people who are at home. For hospitalized patients, the evidence is weak and we may not use it.
Right.
But because of shortage of remdesivir, FabiFlu probably has at the moment in the emergency situation a more role to play for at least moderate cases.
Right. It's interesting because in the new COVID guidelines, AIIMS has actually said that remdesivir has been removed from standard recommendations and has been put only as an emergency use because they say it has limited benefits.
Correct. See, remdesivir, hardly any mortality benefit has been shown. It has been shown to reduce ICU and hospital length of stay and maybe progression to severity of disease in moderate to severe cases only. So WHO also does not recommend the use of remdesivir. So I think I must emphasize, remdesivir is not a wonder drug. So please don't panic if remdesivir is not available or not given to you, particularly when you are at home and you are not that sick. And FabiFlu is also, there is a bit of a shortage, but it is still available at some places. And for mild cases, I think it still can be used at home.
All right. On that note, we're going to slip into a very short break. Our panel of expert doctors will continue to be live with us. We'll take your questions on the current COVID-19 crisis. You can call us on the number that's going to flash on your screens there. Dial us and we'll have your questions answered. Stay with us. Welcome back. Our panel of expert doctors continue to be live with us. We also have our first caller dialing in from Lucknow, Mr. K.N. Singh. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, hi. I have a question. My family, including my wife, my 6-year-old kid, 2-year-old kid, all are diagnosed with the COVID, and it has been almost 11 days from the symptom onset for the elder kid. So my question is that what are the protocols and the medicine which I can give to my kids, because the prescription by the doctor doesn't include anything like significant. They are saying that give vitamin D and zinc, and when I can say that now they are out of the critical phase of the COVID, the duration of the COVID.
Dr. Khilnani, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah,
the prescription doesn't include any fancy drugs. I think that's a good thing. And when can this family, be free from isolation?
Rishika, you have given an answer in a way. For the children in the pediatric population, I am not a pediatrician, but I have the information and knowledge that they don't require any specific drug for them, and they can continue taking some vitamins. As far as the adults are concerned, just I want to tell you that even after recovery from COVID, whether it's mild, moderate or severe, some of the symptoms continue, and one of the most common symptoms is extreme fatigue. You don't feel like doing anything, little bit of depression, sleep disturbances, body ache, pain in the legs, appetite loss, all those things continue, and for this we do advise some amount of physiotherapy, walking around, taking good food, healthy diet, vitamins that should include zinc and vitamin C.
Yes.
Generally we prescribe them for 15 to 30 days, but gradually everything will go away. Don't go for any fancy medication or astronomical expensive things, because you cannot beat the time and it heals with time. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you, Dr. Khilnani, for that answer. And Mr. Singh, thanks for dialing in. We wish you and your family a speedy recovery. Our next caller, Akshat, is dialing in from Hyderabad. Go ahead, Akshat.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it short. So what we've heard over the last few weeks is that Covishield, which they say is a modified version of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, has been less effective as compared to the Bharat Biotech's Covaxin. And as a result of which, there is a higher demand in Hyderabad, in state government and private hospitals across the city for Covaxin. And doctors and health workers are advising us to, also look at Covishield as an alternative.
Okay.
Now, what would you say is ideal? And is it, it's not like we have a choice if we go in for the free vaccination drive, but what would you say is ideal? Should we wait for Covaxin to come back to be restocked, or is it okay to go ahead with Covishield?
All right. Akshat, I think that's a question that a lot of viewers have actually asked. We also have our next caller, Paul, dialing in from Kolkata. Let's take his question and then I'll have both answered. Paul, go ahead.
Can you tell me whether somebody who's already taken an anti-rabies injection take the Covishield or Covaxin vaccination?
Okay. Dr. Mehta, would you like to take on the question first of Covaxin versus Covishield? Should the young people in Hyderabad wait for Covaxin? Should they take Covishield? What do you recommend?
See, there was some initial reports which showed that Covaxin was probably more effective against the variants of this virus, but really it is not a huge difference, and I would say that they are all quite reasonably effective. 70-75% versus 80% really makes no difference. So whatever you get, please take it and don't delay it.
Okay.
Also, don't delay that, because the immunity is supposed to be more if you delay the second shot of the booster dose. Don't delay that also. At the moment, we are passing through crisis, and my recommendation is, when your turn comes to take the shot, please take the booster shot and take whichever vaccine you get.
Well, I hope that answers your question, Akshat. Dr. Mehta, also, would you like to take on the question on, how long after an anti-rabies shot can you take the coronavirus vaccine?
I think probably 4 to 6 weeks would be a reasonable time to take your shot of this thing, unless Dr. Khilani has some other opinion. I would like
Dr. Khilani, would you agree 4 to 6 weeks is enough?
I would like to comment on one, that any vaccination, be it rabies or flu vaccine, there should be gap of at least 2 weeks between the two.
Okay.
If I am permitted 30 seconds, I would like to say, because that Covishield vaccine, which has been told to be having an efficacy of 61%, 71%, 90%, depending upon how you give, but its protection against severe disease is close to 100%. So therefore, anybody who's going by the percentages saying that Covishield is 70% effective,
Okay.
what you are worried about the severe disease, and Covaxin has marginally higher efficacy as far as the
Right.
experiment is concerned. Otherwise, as Dr. Mehta has said, both are good.
Okay, I'm completely out of time, but thank you, doctors, very much for sparing your valuable time being with us on NDTV. I think that clears all doubts that irrespective of any minor statistical difference, all vaccines guarantee protection, at least some level of protection against severe COVID disease. Given the magnitude of the crisis right now, you must go out and get the vaccine if you're eligible to do so. That's all we have time for on the show. Stay safe.